Hey everybody, welcome back to Something to Complain About. This is A. I'm here with T. So last time we were together, we were talking about our actual last century vacations and we got rolling and then you were like, we're going to have to make this a second two-parter kind of thing. So that's what we're going to finish today. So I hope everybody is ready to roll because I think we have some interesting stuff to talk about. And these are not necessarily going to be our childhood vacations. They are still technically last century because they occurred when we were both in undergrad. And we were both in undergrad at the end of the last century. So they're still technically last century vacations. But we were gonna our subtitle for this is what?
International version.
Yeah. So we've got some
Yeah,
doozies, I think.
we do.
You left everybody hanging about your Amsterdam story. Do you want to get us rolling and talk to us a little bit about Amsterdam? Because I told everybody last time, we both have some stories. And as we started thinking about our stories, we realized I haven't heard some of these stories, even though I've known T now for, yeah, 26 or 27 years. And there are some stories I don't think she's heard of mine. And it's not that we didn't have reason to talk about them. I just don't think we ever did. Like, it's the first time I'm going to hear some of them, and it's the first time you're going to hear some of them. So there's going to be some oh shits or whatever coming out of this because I have no idea, but I can tell you by the look on her face that this is probably going to be good. So everybody buckle up because I'm pretty sure
Well,
there's some last century interesting stuff coming here.
oh, there, yes, yes. So, as you know, I studied abroad in London for a, well, basically, I guess it would have been like a quarter. I was there for 3 months.
Yeah.
And the school that I went through, they had different trips where we could go like throughout the UK, like day trips. And then they also offer the opportunity to go onto the continent, as they refer to it in the UK. And there were two trips that I was very interested in. And the first one was Paris,
Yeah.
because I really, really, really wanted to go to Paris. But in talking with my mother, and again, 20-year-old, very broke college student, my mom was like, and of course I wasn't working over there, right?
Right.
So I'm totally living off of my mother and my fiance at that time,
Fair enough.
who are, who were both like sending me $20 bills through the mail so I could eat.
How
No,
how
my
long did it
tea,
take to get something? Like, if they sent
you
you
know,
something from Kansas or whatever, how long did it take to get it in
it
London?
here's the strange thing. Everything appeared to be very random and unpredictable. So my tea, he would send me like 100, $200 at a time.
Yeah.
I got every single one of his envelopes within like 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 days. Um, but then like somebody would send me just a thinking of you card, and it would
Yeah.
take 4 weeks to get there. So it was very random.
Yeah, that's a little crazy.
Isn't that crazy? And I think the thing that worked best was my grandmother bought I don't even know if they do this anymore, the air mail. I don't know if you
Oh,
ever saw them, the sheets,
yeah.
and then you fold them up and they become an envelope.
Yeah.
She used those, and those seemed to work really well for her. And she just bought a stack, and I think they were already like the postage was on and everything. So she would send something, like every third day or something like
Yeah.
that. And it would just be, like grandpa and I love you and we miss you. And so But yeah, it was very random because there were some things like my brother sent me a card and I never got it.
That
And,
doesn't surprise me.
and I remember complaining one time to, I don't know if I was like at the post office there or what, and they blamed it on the Americans, on the American postal system. But at that time, one of my uncles worked for the postal service and he said, no, it's the Brits, it's their fault. So I received probably when I tallied everything up about half of the mail that was sent to me in
Oh, wow.
1997. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Crazy, huh? So I was a broke college student, really, really, really wanted to go to Paris. But Paris was like almost triple the cost of going to Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, okay, well, I think we can swing, between your T and I, we could swing you going to Amsterdam because I want you to be able to go somewhere. And she's like, well, we can't afford Paris. And I'm like, well, like I said, I wasn't working at that time. And all the money that I had made before that got me over there.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll go to Amsterdam. And I don't know what's in Amsterdam, but okay. I knew the Anne Frank house. So here I am, broke college student, get on the bus, go, through, and the channel wasn't even created at that time. It didn't even exist yet. They were building the channel. So we took the ferry and went through France and Belgium, and up in Amsterdam. And so I have, again, very, very little money. And this is how broke I was, the hotel that we stayed at, they had a breakfast buffet. So I would like eat this huge breakfast and then I would pocket pieces of fruit and crackers to eat throughout the day. So, because I was like rationing foods, typical college kid stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And anyway, so as you know, Amsterdam's a gorgeous place. I do not speak Dutch.
Yeah.
So I'm walking around relying on the knowledge that was given to me in the K through 12 public education system that people in Amsterdam, they speak English. They do to varying degrees.
Yeah.
So I spend the day wandering around Amsterdam. I'm doing fine. It's I'm like, okay, it's time for me to head back to the hotel. And of course, everything, all the metro stops and everything is in Dutch, very long, don't know how to pronounce it.
Right.
So I have enough money on me to get back to the hotel. That's how much money I have at the end of today. I have a little bit more for my next day, but I didn't bring all my money with me. So I go up to the ticket booth and, so stupid little American girl. I'm like, I need to go to this stop. And I try to pronounce it and I had written it out.
That would help.
And he's like, okay, gives me a ticket. And anyway, I end up on I start to board and I realize I'm on the wrong train. So I hop off, I go back to him and I'm trying to exchange my ticket because he gave me the wrong ticket. And he kept saying, okay, okay, okay. But it was obvious he wasn't understanding me and I wasn't understanding what he was trying to convey, which was dummy, tickets are non refundable. Like, you're the dumbass who bought the ticket. Not my fault. You're too stupid to know where you really want to go. So, anyway, here I am, flat broke, have no idea how to get back to my hotel. because I have no idea where my hotel is. This was my first full day in Amsterdam. Don't even know what direction. Don't know jack. I can't even take off walking. Like I can't
Yeah.
just like start walking in a direction. And so I'm sitting there, and mind you, this is before cell phones, email was just starting, all that. And I'm 20, and I'm in this country, I don't speak the language, and I just start crying because I'm starting to think like, am I gonna have to go move into the red light district and for a night or two and try to pick up some Dutch and some cash so I can get back to my hotel. And this lady, and I will never forget her, very tall, Nordic looking woman. She's walking by and she sees me just crying. And she walks up to me and she speaks to me in English and she asks me if I'm okay. And I'm like, "Oh my God, you speak English." And she's like, "Yeah, I speak English." And, what's going on? Why are you crying? And so I explained to her what was going on and that I had gotten the wrong ticket and I just lost little kids. So she walked up with me to the uh, ticket booth and talked to the guy. And I'm sure I didn't hear her laughing, but I'm sure stupid little American girl was probably mentioned more than once. She got me the correct ticket and I got to go back.
Oh, that was nice of
So
her.
that, yeah, so that's my story of almost getting stranded in Amsterdam. Maybe it's a little dramatic, but at that time, it really brought home to me what it is like to be in a foreign country because I was spoiled being in London.
Yeah.
There are There are language differences, but everybody still spoke English. So even if some of the terminology was different or the pronunciation was different, you could still do a workaround. Um, there was no
Survivably.
workaround, right?
Yeah.
So, but no, I mean, the only thing I could think of was like I'm in Amsterdam and now I'm screwed. Like I'm gonna live here forever, probably on the street. And
Yeah. No thanks.
but but I think though, I taught adults learning English
Yeah.
for several years. And that was one of the things that I would always kind of think back on and
Yeah.
working with my students as they were learning English is thinking about how I felt being in a country with no money. I knew where I had to go. I couldn't say where it was. I didn't know where it was, but trying to find my way and knowing like I only had like one shot to get it right,
Yep.
So I always reflected back on that in working with my students. And then in Belgium, I had to use the restroom and the bathroom attendant, she wouldn't let me because I didn't have the right money. This was before euros.
You get to pay for. Were you in Brussels?
I was in Bruges,
Okay.
but this was before euros.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when everybody was like, "Oh, you can use American dollars or guilders or pounds," so I had some American dollars. I had a few uh, English pound or British pound sterling. I had some guilders. Wasn't that what those the Dutch money was called guilders?
Sounds right.
Um, but I didn't have the Belgian francs. So she wouldn't
Oh.
let me use the toilet. And I'm standing there like doing a dance and I'm telling her in English, like, if you don't let me go, I'm gonna pee on your floor. And she just sat there and was like speaking to me in French. And I didn't know French at the time. And she's like shaking her head no. Finally, a British couple came in and they're seeing me do the pee pee dance. And the lady turns to her partner and goes, just pay for her to use the bathroom. Like, let her pay for her, let her use the loo. So thank God
That
for them.
that was the weirdest part about London when I was in London was I remember going to Harrods and there was a
Mm,
bathroom and you had to pay to use the bathroom and I remember looking at my cousin and going, "Excuse me? Like
yeah.
you have to
And
pay for the toilet? Like that didn't make any
and,
sense."
and it was expensive to use the bathroom in Harrods. Like, it was a couple pounds, and it didn't matter if you had purchased anything or not, like, you were paying to use that toilet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the weird thing.
You know, one thing I never caught on to, and I don't know how common this was in the men's rooms, but the
Yeah.
bathroom attendants,
Oh
like,
yeah.
90% of the time, they were just sitting there, and and they wouldn't even hand me a towel or anything like that, but they always looked like they wanted a tip, and
Yeah.
And it's like, but you didn't do like, I've been toileting myself for years
For
now.
a while
And
now I
you
think I'm fine.
right. And you didn't even hand me a towel. Um, but I mean, I remember I tipped one just so she'd let me leave. But that was like the thing that just threw me was like a bathroom attendant having to pay to use the restroom, but then also that bathroom attendant just standing there, listen to people
It
go
is
to the
not a
toilet.
job I'd want to have. I think I'll
No,
pass.
me neither.
Yeah.
Me neither.
When were you in London again? What year?
Early 1997, I landed like on the morning of January 2nd, and I left March 24th.
So we were in London at the same time.
We were, huh?
Yep.
Our lives crossed many times before we
It apparently we
officially
lived in the
met.
same dorm. We didn't know we lived in the same dorm until we started doing this podcast. It never came up because who cared, right? When we met each other, we were definitely not living in the dorm. I was in
Yeah,
London for spring break in 1997.
you
So
were.
my cousin was a freshman at Boston University. I was a sophomore at wait, was that right year? Yeah, that's right. I'm pretty sure that's right. It was 1997. So
Yeah.
he we somehow found really cheap tickets. So like I remember um I guess he wasn't my roommate at the time. We were going to be roommates later, but we were friends. We'd had a bunch of classes together, and so we were going to go to Boston for because our spring breaks kind of overlapped a little bit. So we were going to go to Boston just for the weekend, and then my cousin and I were going to fly with some of his friends to London for the week for spring break week.
Mhm.
And so we got tickets. I still remember, and I don't know why I remember this, just because it still seems so cheap. But we flew round trip from Omaha to Boston for like $187,
Oh,
and
that's sweet.
we got our
Even for back
tickets.
then. Yeah.
Yeah, we got our tickets from like my cousin and I got our tickets from Boston to London for like $250 or something crazy round trip. Like it didn't even cost us $500 total
Oh,
for us to go back and forth, right? Like
I
super inexpensive.
I just thought of something. When I studied in London,
Yeah.
and a lot of us did this, we I only purchased a one-way ticket
Oh,
because there was a window of about a week, 10 days that we didn't know, like when classes and all of that would end.
right.
So I
Yeah.
show up in London and I don't have a return ticket. About I don't know, about 3 weeks in, I get a definite date. And I tell my mom, "You need to get my plane ticket so I can come home."
Oh,
She
yeah.
did not. She
Oh.
did not.
Oh.
Um because well, I mean, here's the thing. My mom At that time, I think she flew once, probably 25 years prior.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, every day I'm on the phone with her. And I'm like, "You need to get my ticket because, like, now we're 2 weeks away." "Well,
Yeah.
they're expensive. I'm waiting for the price to come down." "You
That
should
doesn't
have got
work.
the ticket when I first" Right.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do anything over there because, hello, I had no money.
Mhm.
So, my mother purchased my plane ticket home 3 days before I was due to leave. Like, A, I was already on the phone with my host family who were like, because I was going to be evicted of the house in London. And so I remember my host father, P, going, okay, you know, if your mom doesn't get her shit together,
Yeah.
come down here. You can stay for free with us. And then when your visa expires, just turn yourself in and you'll get a free ticket home.
There you go.
And he's like, so it's all good. Like you can live with us for free and you get to see the country for a little longer. And then when it expires, I will just drive you to the police department and you can turn yourself in. And then he's like, you'll never be able to return to the country. All right. Think about it. You're going to be tired of England
Okay, this is
before
not the
you
best
go.
choice, but I understand where it sounded probably a little bit doable if you had
Well,
to.
I mean, it's always good to have multiple options, right?
Yeah.
And I really couldn't turn myself in before my visa expired. Um,
Right.
but and he was like, "Oh, I mean, like you'll probably have somebody from customs accompany you on the way home, and that's okay." So my mom's like lollygagging around. So as my mom is finally like taking it seriously, that like, oh, I need to figure out a way to get my daughter home. Oh my God, all the randomness. Like these were some of the things my mom cooked up. We can fly you into Washington D.C. and then you can stay with your aunt and uncle until they come out for grandpa and grandma's 50th wedding anniversary. There was another one where it would have taken me like 3 countries and like 8 different cities in 5 days home. We ended up um
Why?
I because I creative thinking, hell, I don't know.
Was she trying to find
Um,
that it was like a cheaper way to get you home?
she was trying to find the cheapest way for me to come home. And she waited, she milked the clock until it's like, what my host father said, like, I was willing to take him up on the offer because I could get a train ticket real cheap down to their place. And I think, and I'm sure I told my mom that. I'm like, okay, here are my options. Either you get me home or I'm going to live with P and M for 3 months and miss my wedding. And then I'll have to turn myself in. And at least then I'll be able to get back into the country. So,
Right, and they would have
um,
probably flown you into New York or Washington or somewhere like that, and then you would have had to somehow also get home from there.
yeah, yes.
Okay. So it's just a massive clusterfuck of
Just
gigantic
a minute.
proportions.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, mom finally, and she complained about the ticket back, and I was like, well, but she booked so late that I didn't even have, and of course, remember everything was physical tickets.
Yeah.
I
I was just
remember,
wondering about that because I remember our tickets came in a booklet.
yes,
Yeah.
I remember getting to Heathrow.
Mhm.
And my mom had told me, like, no, they'll have your tickets printed at the desk.
Yeah.
This is who you're going to fly through. And I remember going into Heathrow going, I'm going to murder her if I get here and there are no tickets waiting for me. There were tickets waiting for me, thank God. And then I ended up flying from London to Chicago and then Chicago to Omaha. And my family was waiting for me. And by that time, I was just happy to be to be home. So, yeah.
When I was in
Sorry,
London, it was like, for whatever reason, our tickets out of Boston were Boston to Detroit, Detroit to London. But it was still super cheap,
ah,
like barely 200 and
yeah.
some dollars, right? So nobody cared. We got on a plane in Boston at like 6 o'clock at night. We were in Detroit 2 hours later. Got on a plane an hour after that, and it was an overnight flight to London. We flew into Gatwick, so we were at a completely different airport, right? Not really in the city like you would think. And then what was really kind of cool was my cousin, his his grandpa, well, I suppose he's my second cousin, I guess. His grandpa and my grandmother are siblings, right?
Oh,
So
mhm.
during the war, his grandfather was in Britain and met his grandmother. So his grandmother is
Oh,
a war bride, right? So she and my cousin's mom were actually there visiting her family. So they met us at Gatwick, and she did what grandmas do, right? She handed out money to the two, like gave us a bunch of British pounds or whatever. And I mean, I think I kept it. It was a five or a 20 or whatever it was, 20 pounds. I mean, it wasn't a lot, but it was just enough for like, hey, that's what grandmas do. And the interesting thing is she literally, like, she lived 7 miles from where I grew up. So I saw
oh,
her more than he saw her sometimes, because
oh,
she
that's,
was she was the organist at one of the churches, and when I started playing organ for church, she would lend me music. It was she was Aunt Jay all the time, right? That we just called her Aunt Jay. And she gave us some cash, and we were all so tired, right? It was through two of his friends, three of his friends, and the two of us from BU. And she gave us a little bit of cash. They literally got on the plane that we came in on and went back, right? They were going back to Detroit to go back to Fargo. And we got to our hotel, checked in. I had booked the room on my credit card at the time, thinking that we talked about credit cards in a previous episode. It was one of those credit cards that I got at the little
mm,
table, right? And got ourselves all situated. It was five of us in a room. Totally ridiculous. Everybody chipped in and paid their part. And I remember we came back to the hotel room one morning or one afternoon, and there was a message on the TV screen that was like, "Please come to the front desk," or "Please call the front desk," or whatever. And they had I think what had happened was I had tried to take cash out of an ATM at the airport, and
oh,
they had double charged me for the cash. And so when the hotel went to run my card the next morning, because apparently like, now you just run your card and it's done for the whole stay, and then
mhm,
they would charge you day by day. So they would go to
mhm,
reauthorize my card for the next day, and it wouldn't be reauthorized, and because the something had gone wrong with the ATM. And I didn't have another card with me, so I remember having to, like, call home. I mean, it was this middle of I mean, complete time change or whatever. I couldn't even find my parents. Somehow I got a hold of my cousins in Texas. Don't know why. Somebody wired me money. They were literally going to wire me cash, right? So
yep,
that we would have cash and whatever. Because it was clear something wasn't working with the credit card. And so I went down to this bank. I found out how, like, what information they needed so the money could get wired. They said it would only take a day, maybe 2 days most. The money never came. I just want to point that
mm,
out. The money never ever came. They had to send it back. It arrived the day after we went back to the United States. So the bank, I had to go to the bank before we went to the airport and be like, it was Barclays. I had to be like, I don't know what to do anymore. Like, the money is supposed to still be in transit, and he's like, don't worry about it. We've got your information. We literally will just send it directly back to the transmitting bank. Not a big deal. And that's what they ended up doing. So the money did come back to us. And fortunately, like, we figured out a way to make it all work. But that was super fun in London, because we were all like, what the F are we going to do? How are we supposed to do this? Like, we had it all budgeted out to the penny, because we also were poor college students, right? Like, we knew which cash we needed for what. We were good to go. This was also the trip I went to Paris, and I don't think you know this story. So we did take the Channel to Paris. I don't remember when it opened, but I know it was
oh,
very new.
maybe it had been built. Yeah, because it would have been,
It was
like,
super
brand
new.
new at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I knew it was super new, because they were talking about how, like, it had, like this it hadn't been open very long. So it maybe it opened right before we got there, which would have been while you were there too. Um, because you were leaving about the time I was getting there. Like we were probably only in
Mhm.
London about 5 days the same time. And had I known you, I probably could have just taken you home with me instead of made you stay there. But I would have had to find you a ticket. I mean, although you were at Heathrow. So we take the channel. We go and get food, right? We got Fanta, like whatever that orange
Huh?
soda was. I think it's Fanta,
Yep.
and a loaf of bread and a jar of Nutella, and that's basically what we were going to eat on the train to save money. So like we were trying to be super careful about our cash. And I remember one of the girls on this trip, short little Italian girl, and they had, God help them, I don't know if they'll ever hear this episode, but they had lied to the parents of these other students. Like they had said was a I was studying in London, so I was going back to study the rest of this time in London, and that I was older than I was. They told them I was older than I was, and that I would make sure that everybody got around and was safe and did whatever. And it was the first time she'd been out of the country without her parents. And her parents were at the airport. They took us to they met us at the airport in Boston. And her dad gave me absolute, like, mobster vibes, right? Like, absolute mobster vibes, not monster, but mobster. And he was like, "You're going to take care of my little girl, right?" And I'm like, "I'm going to do the best I can. Is she going to be smart enough to handle this? Like, I don't know what to do." And this is I mean, she's like the perfect hair, everything, whatever. And she was literally talking. You're going to know this type of girl the minute I say this, and I know you're going to roll your eyes, so forgive me. But she literally was telling us she had a whole bag packed for her special hair dryer and all her other stuff. And she was showing me how big her bicep was on her right arm. I kid you not, because that was her hair drying muscle. And I was just kind of like, oh, this is going to be fun. Um, and my cousin, God bless him, was just like, they're fun people to hang out with. Like the guy that went with us was in his fraternity, and the other girl was his girlfriend, and the mobster's daughter was the girlfriend's friend. So like, whatever. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Because it was just basically my cousin and I were going to do our own thing, and the other three were going to do their own thing. We were all just splitting rooms to try to save
Mhm.
money. No big deal. So we get to Paris, and my cousin, if he ever listens to this, I will maybe one day forgive you. Um, we get to the train station, Gare du Nord in Paris, and we get out, and of course, there's people with guns, right? The French police
Mhm.
are there with their machine guns, whatever. Totally took me by surprise. That's not what I'm used to seeing in the United States. And he's
Me
like,
me too. I remember,
it was weird,
stopping
right?
yeah, stopping at the border in France, both
Yeah,
ways, and the first time, like, I screamed because men with machine guns
yeah. It was
came
just
on
like
our bus.
they did it
So
to the train when we got there. I was like, what's
I
going on?
just I just offered them my purse. I mean, I didn't
You're
know
like, I didn't.
you
I
know,
held my
kind of
bag. I was like, what the hell's going on?
kind of like when I asked our driver in Mexico, remember when we were stopped by the men with the guns? And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
"Pedro, do I just give them my purse?"
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we're gonna call my cousin JB. Those are his initials. JB. JB's like, he'd been to Paris a bunch of times, right? He went to a high school that was big enough that they took language trips. So he'd been to Paris, he'd been to Spain, he'd been to different places. And he spoke
Mhm,
French. Most of them spoke some French. I did not speak French, right? Spanish and German. I took those languages. I did not take French. I didn't know. I still don't know any French. And he just said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Everything's fine. That's just normal. There's always people with guns. Like it's just part of their police force. Just don't piss anybody off." I'm
mhm.
like, "Well, certainly not going to try to do that." He's like, "So you guys just go to the hotel. I'm going to meet you there. I need to stop and see a guy about a horse." And I was like, "The hell are you talking?" He's just like, "I'll just meet you there. I know where it's at." I'm like, "I don't know where it's at." So we go out, the four of us. Like I've only known these people for a couple days, and I'm like, "All right,
Mhm.
whatever." We get in a taxi, Rue Bergère. They took us to Rue Bergère. It was the best Western on Rue Bergère. And I don't know why I remember the name of the street, but I think what cracked me up was that it was the best fucking Western on a beautiful street in Paris. I was like, really? Okay, fine. So we went there. And he walks in as we're checking in, right? And they're asking
Mhm.
questions, and of course they're doing it in French. And I'm like, I don't speak French. I'm sorry, like whatever. So he comes in and he's carrying this massive baguette. He went to the bakery. That's the guy about the horse, right? Like, literally went and got a bunch of bread at the
Oh,
bakery because he knew where the
jeez.
bakery was that he wanted to go to. And I was like, you've been here way too many times. Okay, that's fine. Checked
Mhm.
in, did whatever. The next day, we're only going to be in Paris for 2 days. And so, like, we were out doing stuff that night. The next day, we were at the Eiffel Tower. He did not want to go up the Eiffel Tower because he'd been up a few times. So the four of us went up without him. That was fun, whatever. Get back
Mhm.
down. He'd had a couple drinks, so he was kind of having some trouble staying upright. But we went and did some other stuff, and we were at this restaurant, right? Restaurant bar, whatever. A couple hours later, it was starting to be kind of twilight out, and we this was so just so our listeners can understand. This is 1997. Did not have cell phones.
Mm.
Definitely did not have cell phones with cameras. So this was the old way of taking pictures with a clicker camera, right? Like film in the camera. If you don't know what film is, I suppose you should just Google Kodak and you can find out. But I had my camera and I was taking. I remember I was sitting back in this booth kind of like thing, and he and Dee were sitting across from me, and I was trying to take a picture. And this guy comes that I didn't even see. I had no idea he was over to my right, and he comes up to the table and he just starts yelling at us. And I don't speak French. So I'm just looking at him like, what's your problem? I don't speak French, right? Because like, I don't really let people yell at me. And JB put his hand on my knee underneath the table, like to shut me up. So I shut up because I understood the assignment, right? And this guy just kept going and going and going and going and going, and I could hear some bustling behind me behind the counter, but I didn't know what the hell was going on. I'm like, I don't understand what you're saying. I just kept saying, I don't understand what you're saying, right? Have no idea what you're saying. And I could tell that my cousin knew what he was saying because we're some pretty pasty ass white boys from the Dakotas, and he was getting pastier ass whiter as like he was getting paler. And he just kept shaking his head at me like, "Don't say anything, just don't say anything." And I was like, "Okay." And the next thing I know, a gun comes out, and the police people come flying in the building and tackle the dude, and the gun goes off and hits the ceiling.
Oh my gosh.
So I was like, huh, do you want to tell me what that was all about? And he's like, no, he wanted to shoot you. He wanted your camera. He wanted you to give him the camera. I said, why don't you just tell me to give him the camera? I'd have given him the camera. I thought he was trying to steal my camera. He's like, he didn't want to be in your picture. I'm like, I didn't even know he was there. He wasn't in the picture. Right. And I think he had tried to tell him,
Um,
he had tried to say some stuff to him in French before. And I think he was trying to tell him, we didn't even you're not in the picture, like you weren't even near the picture, right? I was shooting the picture this way, not that way, like he was way over here. And they took him away. They didn't hardly ask any questions. They hauled him out, never saw him again. The people behind the counter came out and apologized, didn't make us pay for any food. They told my cousin, as I remember the story, that that dude was a known criminal of some kind who had been causing issues in the
um,
area. And so as soon as he started causing trouble, they called for the police, and they were just very sorry. They hoped that we were all okay. And I was like, I'm gonna need some more alcohol. I hadn't
oh,
had quite enough to
definitely.
drink. Like, I need another bottle of wine or something. So I
Definitely.
mean, I didn't know he didn't. I'm like, why didn't you just tell me he was mad about the picture? I'd have just given him like I had just put a new roll of film in. There was 3 pictures on it. I'd have just ripped it out and handed it to him. Like, if that's all he wanted, if that would have saved everybody from that mess. But he was like, I don't think it would have stopped there. I think he was going to try to rob us. And I was like, well, I ain't got any money anyway. Like, I mean, he can try, but you can't get blood from a turnip. There's nothing left. Like, we spent all our money on the booze. So he can have what he wants. But we survived. We went back to London the next day, kept on going. So I don't think I've ever told you that story.
Never.
No, it was super fun.
Never.
I mean, it was Paris was fun. I'd always go back. We went to Sacré-Cœur, some really awesome places in Paris. It was definitely kind of expensive. It was more expensive than Amsterdam, My Amsterdam story, though, is a little bit like yours in the sense that I didn't have any money when I got there. I had
Mhm.
gone, you probably remember this because I know before I went to do this, I had dinner with you and your T and our friend T and her R, like her husband or whatever. Um, I studied in Greece in it was 1999, so the very end of the last century, right? Like this is the last century vacation I had. Not really a vacation, but kind of studied in Greece for part of that summer, right? I think we were there for I don't know 6 weeks or something. I can't remember anyway. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, you were there for
Um,
quite a while.
we were there for quite a while. So we all flew kind of separately. I was a big fan of Northwest Airlines back then because they were one of the few airlines that flew to Fargo. So I had booked tickets on Northwest because I had miles back then that I could use. And there were a couple other people that had, one of the girls that I flew with, her grandfather was a captain for Northwest. So she got to basically fly for free back then or whatever. So she and I flew out of Omaha. We landed in Minneapolis, flew all the way to Amsterdam. They somehow lost their luggage. We didn't stay in Amsterdam that night. We were in Amsterdam for a couple hours at the airport, flew to Athens. On the way home, she and I were the two that flew back together because I think there were four of us that went on the same flight to Athens. Everybody else decided to go explore Europe. And she and I flew back together, or were supposed to, and the professor was the one that was like responsible for booking all of our hotels.
Mm.
So as we were getting to that last couple days in Greece, I knew the professor wasn't going back to Nebraska. She was going somewhere else. And I was like, okay, so we know you have my itinerary. Like, where am I supposed to stay in Amsterdam? Because I had an overnight layover. I was supposed to land in Amsterdam about 6 o'clock at night. I didn't fly out until noon the next day. And that's how they had
Mhm.
helped me book my ticket. So she said, we'll just get you a hotel because we paid for it, right? Part of our tuition and part
Mhm.
of our fee was our hotels. And so she was like, I'll take care of it. And I kept asking her every single day of that last week, where am I staying when I get to Amsterdam? And she hadn't done it, hadn't done it. A little bit like what your mom did to you. And so
Oh,
she hands me the day I leave, when the little taxi comes to get me from the airport or from the hotel in Athens to take me to the airport. She hands me a slip of paper and it just says Hotel Schiphol, right? Which Schiphol's the name of the airport in Amsterdam. So I figured it had to be close to the airport. And she's like, you go to the transfer desk when you get there, and they will help you get to the airport. Like we've got it taken care of. You've got a room at the hotel, etc. And so I'm like, okay, get to the airport. My flight to Amsterdam is delayed a couple hours. Finally, get on the flight to Amsterdam. It's a 2 or 3 hour flight to Amsterdam. Get to Amsterdam. It's already like 11 o'clock at night. I go to the little transfer desk and they're like, I just don't see one for you, but we'll just put you on a taxi and send you out to the hotel. And I'm like, okay. She said, maybe that they have it for you there. That's probably what happened. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine when you get there. And I was like, okay. So I had money, just then I didn't know what I would need to get like the taxi. I didn't know where it was. I didn't know how far it was. I didn't know anything. And I just knew what I had left in my pocket. But the lady at the desk was like, that'll be plenty. That'll be plenty to get you out there. Not a big deal. And they'll have a shuttle back in the morning, so you won't have to pay for it. I'm like, okay, great. So they put me on this van that's like its own little taxi. And I watched that meter, and as that meter kept ticking up, my heart rate started going a little bit crazy because I was like, I don't like this isn't gonna work. Like I'm gonna have to. I don't know what I'm gonna do. So he gets me to the hotel, and all I had is I had a little bit of Dutch money. It was a guilders. I had a little bit of that,
builders. Mhm.
and I all I had besides that was a little bit of American cash still. And
Mhm.
so we get there and he tells me how much it is, and I hand him the guilders and I say all I've got left is American. And he's like, well, I can't take American. I'm like, well, I don't know what to tell you. That's all I got. That's all I got. Like they told me that I needed this much money to get from here to here. I don't know why it took longer to get from here to here. I don't know why it cost more money. Well, he's like, it's because they put you in a van instead of a car. I'm like, what is wrong with you people? Like I said, so you can either take my American money and go, or I can try to go into the hotel and see if they can change me out. And he's like, don't worry about it, just go. So he took what guilders I had, go into the hotel, and they were like, we don't have a reservation for you.
Oh, jeez.
Okay, so now I have nothing. I have no cash. I had already gone through my credit cards, right? Because I only had a credit card or two, and I just spent 6 weeks or whatever in Greece, and everything was supposed to be covered on my way home. So I didn't shouldn't have needed much cash. So there was literally I couldn't put it on a credit card because I didn't have anything left on my credit card, and I was like, I'm just gonna sleep on the couch here. And she's like, "You can't do that." I'm like, "Well, I don't even know where I'm at. I have no idea how to get back to the airport. Your next shuttle doesn't leave until tomorrow fucking morning. And this was supposed to be done. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do next." I was like losing my shit because it was midnight already, right? In Amsterdam time.
Mhm.
I didn't. And so I remember I got on the phone. She's like, I said, if I call my parents back in the States and they give you a credit card number over the phone, can you take it and book
Mhm.
me a room? And she, of course, did the whole they only have one room left thing. It's like the king suite or whatever with a, 3 beds in it or some nonsense. And I was like, I just need somewhere to sleep. I don't care if you put me in a closet. Like, I really don't care. I just need somewhere to sleep. And she said they could do she thought they could do it over the phone. So I'm in the little phone booth calling my parents, and they're like, okay, well, how do we do that? And they called the front desk, and then the manager was like, no, we can't take a credit card over the phone from another country. Like, that's not an option. And I'm like, so here's the deal. I literally have $100 left on this credit card as far as available credit goes. What will that get me? And she's like, well, the only room we have left is this room. Like, it's midnight. We're booked. Like, we have this room. They finally just gave me the room for whatever was on, like, the $100 I had left on my credit card. I got to sleep for 4 freaking hours, and that was it.
God.
Got back. I slept my 4 hours. I showered. I just got the hell out of there. I got on the thing, and I told the guy before he left, I said, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't have any money for tip. I'm so sorry. Normally I tip drivers, but this has been a nightmare. I have nothing left. He's like, oh, no, we know. We've been talking about you all night. Figured you
I
probably had. So I was so happy to get back to the airport. I met Jay, who was the girl I was flying back with. We got on the airplane, and I was like, I just need to get back to somewhere where I don't have to worry about this anymore.
I remember when I returned to the States and landed in Chicago.
Yeah.
And after 3 months of very quiet, very polite, soft spoken Brits, I was
Yeah.
waiting to go through customs, and the customs official who was getting everybody into line and stuff so we could be processed was a- apparently a native Chicagoan,
Okay.
because I remember her yelling louder than she had been yelling previously. I said, get in line. And I remember thinking, I'm home. I'm back in my country. Like, that was the
Sounds
moment
right.
it became real that I was now home. But I think as you were sharing your story and thinking back on, like, even my Chicago story from the episode before, with my mom carrying the plane tickets and then my mom not getting me a plane ticket home from London, and then you talking about the faculty member failing you.
Yeah.
I One thing I learned definitely after being in London is, um, every trip I have made in the now pushing 28 years since I studied in London, I make my own plans.
Mm-hmm.
I make sure I have everything that I need. I do not rely on anybody else to make any kind of travel plans for me, because that's how you end up wandering around Amsterdam in a hotel trying to stay there for free overnight, and
Yeah.
that's how you panic call your host parents in the UK going, I got enough cash for a one-way train ticket down to your place. And looks like my best option right now is the one that you suggested, which is I'll just hide out at your house for 3 months and turn myself in when my
Yeah.
visa expires.
Well, and I think the thing that is also weird is we don't it's weird to talk about this stuff in the way that we went through it because we do not travel like that now. Right? This is
No,
not a thing. We wouldn't have
no,
had to think about any of that. So I think it's
no.
also important for anybody who's like actually listening to us talk about this. If you're not a Gen Xer or a boomer, like this sounds completely foreign to you probably because
Right.
if you kind of grew up in an era where you always had a cell phone and you could like Google or had a data option, right, where you could find stuff,
Yeah.
we like now if we were going to be like we were in Toronto in May, right? T and I were in Toronto in May, and we didn't even have to change over our phone service or anything. Like you
Yeah.
used to have to do certain things if you traveled out of the country, and now if you're in Mexico or Canada for like at least for our carrier, you don't have to do anything. You just it
Mhm.
works. Like it still works fine. We didn't have that option. Like if we would travel now and we were in London or Amsterdam, we would have easily been able to look up exactly where our hotel was. We could have actually used Google Translator and shown it to the guy behind the glass and been like, this is where I got to go. And it would have been a hell of a lot easier to do. But
Well,
this was
and
not the way it worked for us. We had to write everything down and we had to try to figure out where to be.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I just think about like the last time I traveled overseas and just um or even when I went to Peru,
Yeah.
I called my husband from Machu Picchu.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
We that was insane. Like I
I,
still remember having my
I
MCI international calling card,
oh
which I know
yes,
sounds very
yes.
foreign to anybody who's not our age. MCI was a phone
And
company back then, and you got a card that had a bunch of like it looked like a credit card, and then you would dial this number from overseas, and it would charge your actual like that's how my it would charge my home phone bill for
yeah,
the call that I made from Europe.
yeah.
So it was just a whole different, and we didn't think anything of
Very
it because that's how we lived. That was
that's
our
how
life. No big
yeah,
deal.
that's how we lived. But yeah, but no, lessons learned. One was to no longer include my mother in any kind of travel plans ever again because she knew not what she was doing. And as a matter of fact, when we flew to Florida a couple years after that, I just handled everything
Yeah,
because I was like, no, see, we're not doing, we're not booking this flight 2 days before we go. But again, we know what we know, right?
yeah, we do.
And my mom did not understand um, flying, and she definitely didn't understand international flights. That
Well,
like you don't just book a seat
no,
2 days before. I mean, you
no,
can if there's
yeah,
room and you got the money for it. Um, but yeah, that was nuts. I was so grateful when I landed in Omaha after that because that was nuts.
sure,
And
yeah.
then on the way back from Omaha to Kansas, my my T got pulled over by a highway patrol officer at about 2 a.m. About
So
40 miles from home in
basically,
Kansas.
the moral of our stories over these last two episodes is that our last century vacations were fairly dramatic.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're probably fortunate we survived that. Which honestly is the name of the game, right? Like we're fairly fortunate we survived anyway being Gen Xers. So why not have our vacations be total clusterfucks too?
Well, I mean, it was all good until it wasn't good, and then things got,
Yeah, that's a
just
story of Gen X, right? Like
pretty much.
it was
That's
good
kind of
until it was whatever.
until I couldn't convince my mother to give me a plane ticket home when I was going to be evicted from my my residence in another country in 3 days. Like now's the time.
I mean,
Now's
you
the time to get
mentioned
my
going to the
ticket.
red light district. I really should have just been
Yeah.
like, screw it. I'm not going to
What
stay
you
at
didn't
this stupid
even
hotel. Just take me to the red light district. All I had was a
so
duffel
you
bag.
so you went to Amsterdam without seeing Amsterdam.
I mean, yeah, no, I wasn't actually able to see Amsterdam because all I was doing was I thought I was going to actually because I was supposed to land in Amsterdam around 6 p.m. and I was supposed to be able to be there until noonish the next day. So I had intended to actually spend my evening out like exploring Amsterdam. I had mapped out a plan to do that and had gotten some feedback from some people in my group who had actually been to Amsterdam. So I kind of knew some places to go and to try, and then of
Mhm.
course because my flight was so delayed by the time I actually got to the airport in Amsterdam and then got to my hotel, and that whole situation, like I mean there was nowhere to go. I'm sure there was somewhere to go at that time of night in Amsterdam. I'm sure I could have gone to the red light district, but I was so tired and I was like, I need to get some sleep and get back to the
You
airport so I can get home.
you really missed out.
Well, I'm sure.
Um, and I know back then, and it was very, very interesting, because I had heard of the red light district. And so I'm walking around and I felt perfectly safe wherever I was on that trip. I felt perfectly safe in London. Um, oh, well, that one time a man followed me in London and I turned around and screamed, "What the fuck do you want?" And he scattered off. But
That's fair.
felt really safe in London. So here I am, 20 years old, wandering around Amsterdam. And I couldn't figure out that all of a sudden, here's all of these, and they look like solid glass doors with curtains. And the curtains, some of the curtains were pulled back, and you could see a bed and like a washstand and stuff. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And at first, I'm like, is this some kind of like abstract, weird store display? I had walked into the red light district, and it
Oh,
wasn't until I had gone like farther down the block. Um, but it was amazing because talking to people afterwards, and they were like, you know, wasn't it like really seedy, or were you worried about your safety? And I was like, no, that was
no.
probably the safest I was in Amsterdam. Because if a guy wanted something, it was all right there. So I felt perfectly safe, and like the streets were clean, everything was well taken care of. I saw a lot of other wild things in Amsterdam. And after going to the sex museum, I learned a few things, two things. First of all, obey any warning signs about graphic images. And second thing, there are some things that you see that you cannot unsee. I learned a lot that I didn't even know existed about sex that day.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Including
I wish I would have actually had time to explore, but I
including I went into one of those little like 25-cent movie booths
mhm.
because this is how naive I was. I'm like, and it was in the sex museum, because I'm like, oh, here's one of those red, 25-cent movie booths. So I walk in and they were playing a movie. And then it dawned on me what men do in there. And then that's how like naive I was at the time. Like nowadays, I could go to the sex museum and be like, done that, seen that, named that. Um, But
At the
back
time, though,
then,
you were like, "Oh my god. No thanks."
I yeah, yeah. And I remember somebody saying like, "Miss, are you sure you want to go up the stairs?" I'm like, well, "Yeah. I mean, I paid for it.
I paid my
I'm
25
broke.
cents.
I paid my 25 cents. I don't
Yeah.
see what all the fuss is about."
And then you felt like you needed to, like, destroy your shoes afterwards.
Gosh, like 3 minutes later, it's like, ew.
I'm done. Yeah,
And that
I
was
still I need to go back. I actually need to go back and spend time in Amsterdam instead of, like, having to flee so quickly, but I mean, in all fairness, I had just spent 6 weeks all around Greece.
yeah,
I had been in Paris for a bit. I had been in London for a while, so it wasn't like I was deprived. I just wish I would have had some time since I was actually in Amsterdam to. And I don't. I mean, I don't speak Dutch, but I did enough. I had enough German in me at the
oh,
time
no.
that
No,
I could
no,
have
it's
been
okay.
okay.
If if you don't speak Dutch, the
You just
Dutch
break
speak
down crying.
English, and then you just break down crying. When
Okay,
people don't understand you, you just stand there and cry
yeah.
and
I
wonder if
remember.
that
It's
that
kind of funny
empty booth
because
in the red light district's still open.
oh, I'm sure. I mean, so my flight home from Amsterdam was on KLM, and I had upgraded to business class because I had all these points or whatever, and it was I just for one flight I could upgrade to business class. So I upgraded for the flight across the pond, right? Because I was like, that's going
Mhm.
to be 8 hours in the plane, and you had at the time, this is not the case anymore, but at the time, in order to sit in business class or first class, you had to be dressed appropriately, like you couldn't wear shorts, it was
Oh,
middle of
yeah.
summer, so they made me change into these pants. Like I had to put like khakis on, and I remember putting the khakis on in the airport, and I went to the bathroom, and I buttoned the khakis and I put my belt on, and as I was trying to put my belt on, the button flew off the khaki.
Ah!
So no button on the khaki, and I was like, I have nothing else because I'd already turned in my luggage. Right, I had already checked my bag; everything was gone. So I'm like, okay. So I just tightened the belt, and I had a pair of shorts in my backpack. And so I get on the plane, I get seated. They bring you champagne in business class. Like I thought I was like, it was super exciting. And we get in the air, and I remember looking out, like we were already high enough up in the air. I remember looking down and being like, oh, Greenland. I'm gonna go change my pants now, right? So I had a couple glasses of champagne, and I went into the bathroom, and I came out wearing my shorts, and the little stewardesses were all chattering in Dutch, and it's close enough to German that I could understand them, and so I turned around and I replied to them in German, "If you want me off the plane, you're gonna have to open the door." And they just looked at me. Nobody said a thing to me the rest of the flight. They just kept bringing me champagne. So I don't know. Like I must have made them feel bad, but I was like, I'm not gonna wear pants without a button for the next 9 hours. Like it's just not gonna happen. I'm not gonna be uncomfortable. Sorry that the button flew off, but this is just the way it goes. And if you don't want me on the plane, you can let me out. And they just looked at me like I
Closest
had lost my mind.
the closest I've ever been to business class was I used the business class, toilet on
Oh
a
yeah.
flight, and I got yelled at
Yeah, they're not any
because I was
nicer. They're the same damn
they're
toilets.
not. They're
No.
not. So I thought I was just in this, as there wasn't anything spectacular.
Yeah.
And I walked out and the flight attendant's like, "Yeah, no, you're not allowed up here." And I'm
Too
like, "Well, this
bad.
shooter's just the same as the one in the bank.
Yeah,
This
and
one's
sometimes the
closer."
lines are long and you need to go. Like it's whatever. What are you gonna do? Kick me out? We're
Well, then I'm
37,000
like,
feet above the Atlantic. Like, good luck. You're not gonna land the
and,
plane just because I used the wrong bathroom.
and then I'm like, because I tattled on some of my fellow flyers. I'm like, well, he used the same one, and so
Yeah,
did she. So I'm just
I just figured I could
follow the
do it.
leader. Just a
I mean, I
just
think
a
here. So
just
what's
a
interesting
proud
about
American girl.
yeah,
Yeah.
and honestly, I have waited to go home, so just who cares? Like we're going home. It's all right. Get me there.
No, that was actually on a flight to DC, and I should have known better. But you know,
Oh, right.
um,
So whatever.
as I often use as a defense, in going through customs when entering another country. I'm just a stupid American. So
It's
there
funny
you
how
go.
far that excuse will get you in most places because
It's got me.
they don't think we know what we're like. I think a lot of other countries, when you go to Europe, they're sort of like, oh, Americans, because
The
we don't usually know their language when we get there, and so they have to know our language so that they
oh,
can make money
what's
off of us.
even better is when you speak their language and you
Yeah,
explain that you're just a stupid American. Like when I went through customs in Peru, I spoke Spanish and there was something I forgot to fill out on that stupid little form they give you. And so the customs official, he's like, "Oh, senora, you made a mistake. You forgot this, and why?" And I said, "Because I'm a stupid American." I told him in Spanish, and then we both just laughed, and he's like, "Yeah." And then I fixed it and
off we
entered
went.
entered Peru. Off we went.
So that is
All
the
right.
end of our last century vacations. We talked about our vacations when we were younger, and again when we were actually old enough to go on our own sort of vacations. So I guess we'd love to hear what any of your being our listeners, your vacations were like once you kind of got into
If
college or wherever you were at in the last
if
century. If you
any
went places on your own,
if anybody's still listening after an hour and 20 minutes of
yeah,
reminiscing,
we'll probably cut some of it
proceed.
anyway. It's good. Um,
We'll cut all of your dialogue, your
that's fine.
stories, other than the one about the gun. They're kind of
That
boring.
was just freaky. It was a freaky experience, but yeah, I mean, vacations are so much different now because we actually have the ability. We have little computers in our hands. We would have never
Yes.
even thought that was possible in the late '90s, which really doesn't seem that long ago. But that just kind of tells you how absolutely rapidly technology has evolved since the last century when we were in college and having our own little vacation. So
Yeah.
go ahead and make, in the comments, leave us some information about your own experiences traveling, fun little stories. We'd love to hear them. Remember to like and subscribe and share with your friends. And as always, thanks for listening and check back with us next week for something else to complain about. T, it's been fun.
Yes. Always. Always. So everyone be good.
See you next time. Bye.